moves to the beat of progress. And no one knows its pulse like BDO Unibank. With leading scale and reach, the expertise and local knowledge to connect you to Philippine business. BDO Unibank. We find ways. Moves to the beat of progress. And no one knows its pulse like BDO Unibank. With leading scale and reach, the expertise and local knowledge to connect you to Philippine business. BDO Unibank. We find ways.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this NordCham Philippines event. We are just about to start, and I'm really happy with our lineup for today. You have a special treat incoming. We have with us today our President Bo Lundqvist to do the opening welcome remarks. Then we have Designate Ambassador Annika Thunberg, Designated Ambassador for Sweden here in the Philippines. And then we have Head of Sustainability from BDO, Marla Garin Alvarez. So this is a very great lineup. And I would like to hand over the word now to NordCham's President, Mr. Bo Lundqvist. Bo.
Thank you, Jesper. And hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And I'm honored, of course, to be able to kick off this important topic with a few words, hopefully of wisdom, that will be for you to judge yourself. Now, on the important topic of today's discussion, I wanted to start with kind of laying the landscape for why we have put together this event. Now, the importance of inclusion and diversity has been a focal point for a very long time in the Nordic countries. In many ways, I think it is safe to say that equality is not only a cornerstone, perhaps, of our societies, but it's very much the way we live and the way, and most probably also a major contributor to the success of our countries, success in terms of economy, social welfare, but also I think in the success in terms of quality of life. So from that perspective, a very important topic for us being from the Nordic countries. To somewhat provide some proof there, I did look at the Global Gender Gap Report of 2020, which shows Iceland as the world leader and then followed by the Nordic countries. So there is some sort of proof to my previous statement as well. One important part to note as well is that the Philippines ranks 16, which is a very good rank, specifically in the context of the region we're in. So from that perspective, I also would like to congratulate Philippines to have reached that quite high level in the Gender Gap Report. Now, today we're going to be talking about gender equality and how important it is to close the gap that unfortunately still exists. We're going to talk about it in terms of society, but we're also going to talk about it in terms of business, because gender equality makes not only sense, it makes business sense, which I think is important to note for anyone that is involved in business anywhere, in fact. I think I could probably count or state countless of studies and reports and articles, etc., of companies that have adopted native gender equality and the fact that these companies actually do perform better. I think it's also proven that in many ways women are better managers than are us male, and that is, I think, a fact these days that we just have to accept. And from a personal experience, if I may interject that, I can concur at my company, Retail Associates. Diversity and gender equality is something that is in our DNA, has always been in our DNA from employee number one. And we have achieved I would say, almost perfect gender equality at all levels in the company. In fact, we have more women than men in our company, which is unique, knowing that we are in IT, which is, I think, traditionally quite male dominated. And I'm very happy with that. So I'd like to say, and I typically say, that we are evidence to the fact that the best man for the job is very often a woman. That is true. So to talk more about this topic, and specifically from a Nordic perspective, we have the honor today of having Annika Thunberg, Ambassador Designate of Sweden to the Philippines, with us here today. Ambassador Thunberg arrived just a couple of weeks ago to the Philippines, and as you can see, she is flying the flag high behind her there. She joined us from her previous position in Mexico as ambassador there. Ambassador Thunborg has a PhD in political science from the University of Lund in Sweden, and she also has a master's degree in international affairs from the Columbia University in New York, United States. So with that, it is truly my sincere pleasure to turn over this presentation to Ambassador Thunborg, and at the same time, officially greeting her welcome to the Philippines, or Mabuhay ang Pilipinas, as we would normally say. Thank you very much. Over to you, Annika.
Thank you so much, Bo, for this very warm welcome, and good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you today in this event organized by NordCham in cooperation with the Banco de Oro and the Embassy of Sweden. And I'm very happy to share this space with Marla Garin Alvarez and of course with Bo Lundqvist and Jesper Svenningsen. As Bo mentioned, I arrived in the Philippines only 3 weeks ago, and I'm delighted to be here taking up my post as ambassador designate to the Philippines, and looking forward to working with you all during my tenure here, and hopefully we can meet in person not so far from now. I'm certainly humbled by the task assigned to me here today of trying to talk about the importance of gender diversity and equality to a group such as yours, which has worked on these issues for a long time in general, and here in the Philippines in particular. And I'm much aware of the fact that Bo also mentioned that the Philippines rank very high in global indexes on gender equality, numbers in the place number 16 or 17, as Bo mentioned. And that is, of course, far ahead of all other countries in Asia and of the majority of countries in Europe. And as Bo also mentioned, nevertheless, the Nordic countries we rank also very high, and Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden all rank among the 5 most advanced countries in this area. So the Nordics possibly have something to contribute, although I am very much looking forward to hear and learn from you what we, the Nordics, can learn from the Philippines. I will focus my intervention here today on the Swedish experience, why I believe where we are today in terms of gender equality, what remains to be done, and I will also say a couple of words about initiatives taken by Swedish companies that aim to close the gender gap in the private sector. And I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A and the discussion afterwards. That's always my favorite part of these events. So let me start, ladies and gentlemen, dear partners and friends. As you may know, the Swedish government adopted a feminist foreign policy in 2014, and in 2019, it adopted a feminist trade policy. Why did we do that? Well, the rationale was quite simple. Women constitute 50% of the world's population and have 50% representation in every segment of the population, in every group or minority of a society, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, socioeconomic level, religion, skin color, sexual preference, or disability. However, women still don't have the same rights, the same representation, or the same resources that men have. The feminist foreign policy thus aims to address these inequalities and to seek parity so that women can enjoy the same rights, representation, and resources that men enjoy. These are the 3 R's that constitute the simple formula of the feminist foreign policy and that we pursue in every area of our work, be it political, economic, social, cultural, or administrative. Of course, adapted to the context, the local circumstances in every case. So why do we do this? And it is because we are convinced that parity offers advantages for everyone, for a family, for a company, for a country. That was also what Bo said just a couple of minutes ago. We are convinced that more equal societies, both socioeconomically more equal and from a gender perspective, that they have better public health, socioeconomic development, and social security, that they are more peaceful and sustainable, creative and innovative because more perspectives, experiences, and ideas are included. Sweden wasn't always a country that focused on gender equality. When I was a child in the 1970s, Sweden was still a macho or a machista society, I would say. There were few women in government, there were few women in parliament. Most men worked all the time, like my father, and most women were at home with their children, as was my mother, although more women had started to work part-time at the time. What changed this situation? Several factors. Firstly, the social movements, including the feminist movements of the 1960s. They helped change the perception of what it was to be a woman and move the focus to parity, equity. Secondly, the political leadership of the 1960s and 70s. Progressive male politicians like my father, who emphasized that men and women had the same values, had the same value, perhaps also the same values, the same rights, that they were equal. These political leaders couldn't really change in practice, like my father, who never did any housework or so, but in theory, and this was very important for setting the stage for the future. Thirdly, and most importantly, the laws, the reforms, and the institutions that implemented them. And I will give a few examples. In 1969, 1970, we adopted the law that schools should promote the equal treatment of boys and girls. This was very important for my generation. I started primary school in 1970, and I remember this equal treatment of boys and girls, which was very important. In 1971, we adopted the individual or separate taxation of income between spouses. The male breadwinner became two breadwinners. And this was an extremely important reform. Until then, the married couple had been seen as a unit. And due to high taxation, women's wage work was not financially rewarding. And this is an example of using economic incentives or tax policies to change behavior. And this is quite typical for the Nordic model, I would say. In 1974, we adopted the shared and gender-neutral parental leave and the social security benefits that came with it. Today, we have 180 days of parental leave and paid at 80% of the earnings allocated to each parent. And out of which 3 months are non-transferable. And this means that if the father, who still in Sweden takes usually a shorter parental leave, but it means that if the father doesn't take at least 3 months parental leave, the couple as a whole will lose the 3 months. Also in 1974, it became legal to obtain a divorce only with the consent of one spouse. And in 1974, abortion became legal until the 18th week of pregnancy. In 1976, we adopted equal treatment between men and women in the public sector, in a similar way as we had adopted it for the schools earlier. In 1980, we got the law against gender discrimination in the workplace. And also in 1980, we changed the law about the succession to the throne. From that year onwards, the firstborn child inherits the throne no matter what sex. And as you may know, Crown Princess Victoria is next in line, although she does have a younger brother. Let me also say, I mean, you do know that Sweden is a monarchy. The royal family does not have any political power, but a very important ceremonial role. In 1982, we changed the name law. It became possible to choose a woman's or a man's family name upon marriage. And today it's quite common that men take their wives' names or that the children have their mother's name, although the parents are married. In 1983, a gender equality agreement was reached among the parties of the labor market, and those are the government, the companies, and the trade unions. And they reached the agreement that all professions should be open to women, including in the armed forces. In 1994, we got gender mainstreaming, meaning that all decisions in all policy areas and at all levels were to be permeated by a gender equality perspective. And in 2009, the Discrimination Act replaced 7 separate anti-discrimination laws, thus prohibiting in one law the discrimination related to gender, transgender identity or expression, sexual orientation, ethnicity, disability, age, religion, or other belief. So what results and changes did we see based on these reforms? First, some fun facts. Firstly, priesthood in the Swedish church, which is Lutheran, had actually been open to women since the 1950s, but we didn't get our first female bishop until 1997. But today, the archbishop is a woman. Secondly, we got our first female general in 2013 and our first acting female head of the army in 2019. But we are still to see a female head of the armed forces. Thirdly, and this may be surprising to you, we didn't get the first female head of a ministry until 1976. Today, the ministers of the government are 50-50, and it's similar in the parliament and also at the local level. 50% of the leaders of the political parties are women, more or less, but we are yet to see a female prime minister. And in that sense, we are actually unique in the Nordic region. All the other 4 Nordic countries have all had female prime ministers, or in the case of Iceland, president. And Finland has also had a female president, actually. And Denmark has had a female monarch, or has a queen, of course. So we are far behind our Nordic neighbors when it comes to head of state or prime minister. So besides top positions, what results and changes did we see in society based on these reforms? I would say that in the 1970s and 80s, the focus was on extending women's participation in the workplace through labor market and other reforms, through the economic empowerment of women and through promoting their economic and social independence. In the 1980s, we still focused on the women. Women were encouraged to apply for jobs in male-dominated sectors and to pursue education to reach higher positions. And this was quite typical for my generation. In the 1990s, we started to focus on combating violence against women and saw the need for gender-based research. Thus, the policy was extended to also include the role men needed to play to achieve gender equality, including in the area of sharing unpaid work and childcare. And I believe that this transition to focus more on the role of men and on the male role model that took place over the years has been one of the most important developments to achieve a high level of gender equality. This change is illustrated by looking at how the image of the father changed over time. Men who took care of their children in the 1970s in Sweden were condescendingly called velvet daddies or softies. In the 1990s, men who took care of their children were portrayed as power daddies who dressed in business suits and pushed the baby carriage. The idea of shared childcare and new gender roles started to take hold, and this would help change the reality for future generations. From 2000 and onwards, we have seen a continued focus on the man, on the advantages that men get through gender equality. For example, that they get better relations with their kids, that a man doesn't need to be the prime breadwinner in the traditional way, but also can focus on other things in life, including choosing the career he wants. And today we see in Sweden many male nurses, social secretaries, and men as caretakers of children and of the elderly, something that was almost unheard of when I was a child. And I would like to give an example from the Swedish Foreign Ministry to illustrate this change. While men in my parents' generation didn't spend much time with their children, men in my generation and younger have stayed at home, usually around 6 months, which is then the law, the 180 days per person in a couple. And then the father has then stayed at home these 6 months with each one of their children while their wives have been working. And we had an secretary in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs who showed the way 20 years ago. He stayed at home with his children when they were small, and he left the office to pick up his children at 5 o'clock every day, thus showing that you could combine a high-level position with child-caring duties, thus setting example for other male diplomats. They felt that if he could do it, they could do it too. And we had a leader of a political party who did the same, and we had some other well-known people who did the same at the time. And today in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, we are more or less 50-50 at all levels, from the ministers to the administrative staff, to the ambassador, from the ambassadors to the second secretaries. And I would say that the advantage of this is that we do have a more comfortable work environment than we had when I started at the ministry 25 years ago, because we have an environment in which we are not any longer defined according to our gender, but we are defined according to who we are as individuals, as human beings. I should also underline the importance that a strategic family policy had to achieve gender equality, a strategic family policy. And with this, I mean a solid societal infrastructure made up of a school system that covers the entire day, daycare centers and kindergarten for all preschool children, and after school activities for school children, among other things. And this system has made it possible for both parents to combine full-time work with family life. So is everything then fine in Sweden? Of course not. There continues to be a lot of things to do. The work never ends. Firstly, I'd like to mention gender-based harassment and violence that has gotten worse due to the pandemic, as it has all over the world. So it has in Sweden. The advantage for Sweden being that we have kept the schools open during the pandemic and kept our social security system intact, which has meant that people have not lost their income, but more people have worked from home, and mental health issues, domestic tensions, and violence have increased according to the statistics. Secondly, there continues to be a lot to do in the private sector, where Sweden has not reached parity, as we have done in the public sector. On average, 1/3 or 35% of the members of the Swedish company boards are women. And in leadership groups, 1/4 or 25% of the members are women. Still, only 10% of the companies feature a woman as their CEO, and less than 10% of the board directors are women. Attempting to change this situation was one of the reasons why Sweden adopted a feminist trade policy in 2019. And what we have seen in the last couple of years is that we have almost reached parity among the CEOs and the board members of the state-owned or partially state-owned companies. Let me also emphasize that we have never used quotas in Sweden. Our tradition is much more based on trying to reach consensus among the parties concerned. This makes change take longer, perhaps, but when it occurs, it is more sustainable. At least that is what we believe. When we look at the companies, the sectors that show the highest level of parity are real estate, finance, health, and consumer services. And the sectors that show the lowest level of parity include traditional industrial companies and manufacturing, energy, and defense. And as regards to management within the leadership groups in most companies, the women present are most often heading the divisions dealing with human resources, public information, and legal services, whereas other more operational divisions continue to be headed by men. Thus, the situation is not that different than it is in similar companies from and in other countries. But the situation is changing. There is a strong incentive to improve the ratio, the parity from the company side, since they need to keep their comparative and competitive advantage in the area of innovation, for example. And to do this, as we already mentioned, diversity is key. And the companies also need to cater to an increasingly gender equal market with women as strong consumers. And I would be pleased to hear from Volvo Cars, which I believe is with us today, because I know that you have been taking into account that more and more car owners and drivers are women and have other needs than men. Other big companies present on the Filipino market are other big Swedish companies, I should say, present on the Filipino market are consumer and service driven. And globally, companies such as IKEA and H&M and Transcom have a much better gender and diversity ratio than the average. When Team Sweden in Mexico, where I served as ambassador for 5 years before coming here, when we conducted this gender survey there among the Swedish multinational companies, IKEA together with AstraZeneca came out on top in all categories researched. It is usually more challenging for traditional industrial companies, but also in this sector we find interesting developments, and I will mention a few. Saab, which is one of the world's leading companies in the area of defense and security, is an industry, of course, traditionally dominated by men, as the defense industry is. But Saab has today a commitment to improve gender equality, including making sure that 35% of their managers are women by 2025, and this is up from 14% in 2007 and 27% in 2015. They then want to have more than 1/3 of their manager, as women by 2025 or in 3 years. And Saab is also promoting science, engineering, and technology education to girls and young women between 12 and 19 years old. So we know women are continuing to be underrepresented in the natural sciences and engineering and technology. Another example, Volvo Cars again, was awarded a prize in 2017 for providing the best work environment for families and for facilitating the possibilities to combine work with family life for both men and women, among other things through active promotion of the taking of paternity leave among their male employees. And a third example, Volvo Group received a prize for its program Leaders for the Future, in which 50% of the participants are women and which has adopted a gender perspective in its curriculum that includes discussions of values and norms and concrete measures on how to deal with gender-based stereotypes and to fight the macho culture or machismo in the workplace. All the men who participate in the program have senior female mentors, and one objective of the program is to form ties and establish networks among senior women managers and future male managers to change the traditional dynamics. And I also saw how this worked outside headquarters in Mexico, where Volvo Buses is very big. It was a very rewarding experience to get together with the participants of this Leaders for the Future group and to discuss all kinds of issues with the young men and women who belong to that. So these were just a few examples, and I am very much looking forward to hearing more stories from you, the companies attending this webinar, and of course to discuss all the issues brought up here today with the broader audience, and I will be ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Annika, for sharing all of these very interesting developments happening in Sweden, and also for mentioning, of course, I'm from Denmark, the Danish monarchy, which is run by a female, our dear Queen Margaret. Anyway, this was really interesting. To everybody on this call, right? Type in your questions, share your perspectives. We are very keen to deal with them during our Q&A, which will follow after our next presentation, because today we are happy to have not just one great presenter, but two. So Allow me to introduce to you our next speaker, Marla Garin Alvarez. She is the VP at BDO Unibank. Unibank is our esteemed diamond business partner here at NordCham, and today they are represented by Joseph Bong Leto and Marie Maan Mariano from the international desk. Thank you for always supporting us. Okay, let's get to a proper introduction of Marla. Marla is a VP of Sustainability. She heads the BDO Sustainability Office and drives the execution of the BDO Sustainable Finance Framework. She oversees policy formulation and programs review, as well as monitoring, tracking, and reporting of the bank's environmental and social impact and initiatives. And she produces the annual BDO Sustainability Report. She works closely with business groups, particularly with the Sustainable Finance Desk of the Institutional Banking Group, Investor Relations and Corporate Planning, Risk Management Group, and the BDO Foundation, as subject matter expert and advisor, to ensure the bank's alignment of its policies and practices with global standards, regulations, and law on sustainability reporting. She's also responsible for communicating sustainability initiatives to internal and external stakeholders, and she represents BDO in external speaking engagements and forums like this one today. Before joining BDO, Marla was Diversity and Inclusion Lead for news and information service provider Thomson Reuters, where she spent 11 years leading the execution of global strategies in diversity and inclusion, social impact, corporate responsibility, and corporate communications in Asia and then globally. Marla is an experienced international speaker on gender diversity and inclusion and sustainability. She's a certified facilitator of the Google I Am Remarkable workshop for women, an advisor of the Women in Inter-Industry Network, and former board member of the International Association of Business Communicators, IABC, in the Philippines. It is my great pleasure to welcome you, Marla, and thank you so much to you and to BDO for wanting to be part of this very important event we have here today. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Jesper, and thank you to NordCham and the Embassy of Sweden. I am very honored to partner with Ambassador Annika today to talk about gender diversity in the workplace. If I can ask Mabel to share. All right. So for this presentation, what I did was a bit different in terms of thought process. I asked my network for their questions around gender diversity. And while many of them were on next level initiatives to build on what they already have, mostly from well-established multinational companies, there were also a lot of more basic questions from local conglomerates. And I would like to mix both, address both now, because in the past, one of the challenges that we had was to engage local companies in diversity and inclusion. And it was a bit of an uphill struggle in terms of recognizing why it was important and why it should be part of every local company's culture and values and approach to business performance. And so today I'll share my perspective as a sustainability lead for BDO and also from my previous experience as diversity and inclusion lead for Asia and global for my former company, where it applies. So next slide, please. So many people would think of gender as traditionally referring to men and women. And for many companies, they would be correct. But the definition can also be expanded further. Nibel, if you can click next, please. So while it starts with women and men, and if you can click again, please, Nibel, it can also be expanded to refer to our LGBT plus brothers and sisters, to include assigned sex, gender identity, gender roles, gender presentation, and perceived gender. But I recognize that companies are at different levels of appreciation and practice in this sense. So for the purpose of our discussion today, I will focus mostly on women and men, and from the perspective of a local conglomerate. Now, when it comes to diversity, how do we look at it? It's simply the sum of the differences and similarities that makes us all unique as individuals. And there are many different dimensions in diversity. So gender is foremost, usually because, as Ambassador Annika said, the other half of the world is composed of women, and historically women have been underrepresented in terms of decision making, in terms of equality in opportunities and rights. Then there are other diversity dimensions as well, such as ethnicity or race, nationality, age, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and experience. In the Philippine context, gender is also number one, but we should also be looking at ethnicity, particularly for local companies which have nationwide coverage, such as BDO, and age, in terms of the different generations that you can find in the composition of a company or a bank. So think of diversity as an iceberg. It's one of my favorite representations for people to visually perceive diversity. So think of diversity as an iceberg, similar to the one in the Titanic. So 90% of an iceberg is submerged under the waterline, right? And 10% is all that you can see, which unfortunately for the Titanic was what they hit. And you can also look at diversity in that sense. 10% is what we usually visually perceive. It can be the person's gender as we perceive it. It can be the color of the skin. It can be height. It can be appearance. And you form a lot of diversity assumptions on a person based on what you visually perceive. But that's just 10% of who the person is or what that person represents. 90% is submerged. And this would refer to a person's religion, for example, mental health, political views, religious affiliation. So these are all hidden diversity dimensions within an individual that takes time for others to really know and appreciate in a person. Now, these are very important aspects for us to consider when we look at individuals within the workplace. Click next, please, Nabel. But for our purposes, when we talk about gender diversity, it's really looking at these three things: equal representation, equal rights, and equal opportunities in the workplace. Next slide, please. I would like to share with you how we at BDO recognize and articulate this. So we have our statement on gender diversity and inclusion. Our statement is on our commitment to promote a work environment that fosters diversity, equity, and inclusion, where everyone receives an equal treatment, equal rights and opportunities, regardless of the dimensions that I mentioned: gender, ethnicity, race, age, religion, sexual orientation, and disability, and are valued individually for their unique contributions to BDO success. Now, from the point of view of sustainability, which is what I advocate now on a bigger scope, gender diversity and inclusion are integral to our social impact on our employees, on our customers, and the rest of our stakeholders. This is why this statement is at the heart of our human capital sustainability strategy, which supports our sustainability framework and Sustainable Development Goal number 5 of the UN SDGs on gender equality. If you want to learn more about this, I encourage you to go visit our website and check out our 2020 sustainability report, which discusses more on this human capital sustainability in detail. Next slide, please. still on not yet, please, Mabel. So still on gender diversity. This is one of my favorite photos at the bank, primarily because it shows our branch colleagues who we consider as our economic frontliners during this pandemic. And at the same time, it's also an excellent visual representation of the bank's representation. So if you can click next, this number represents the number of employees at BDO nationwide. We are at over 38,000 nationwide, mostly based in Luzon, where the key cities are, but also in Visayas and in Mindanao. Next, please, Mabel. Out of that, 76% of our workforce are women. So that's 29,419 women. And 24% are men, 9,337. So really great representation. And I'll talk more about that later on. And finally, another click, Mabel, please. 59% represents senior leadership representation for women at BDO. So last year, it was at 60%. It's a bit down by one at 59%, but still considerable compared to other banks and to other countries. So, when you look at these numbers, you would see that BDO is at that position that other companies and banks in other countries aspire for in terms of representation. In my previous experience, companies would aspire for 30-40% representation, both in the workforce and in senior leadership. But here we already have these high numbers, which are really majority in favor of women. So in the next slide, let me tell you the context of why that is and how that has come about. So if you can click next, Mabel, please. Within the Philippine context, as mentioned by both the ambassador and Bo, we were at number 16. We are at number 16, right, of the global gender gap of the World Economic Forum. But a few years ago, we were actually at number 7 and number 8. And so we have dropped primarily because of political representation. But still, in terms of the context of the country, majority of the population are women. More women than men graduate from higher education. And in fact, women account for 58% of the total graduates for tertiary education, and 36%, an increasing number in terms of STEM tertiary graduates. Women tend to take up business and finance courses more than men. And women, similar to also what Ambassador Annika has shared about Sweden, women are now considered as breadwinners. So in a family, in a Filipino family, it's not uncommon for women, usually the single daughters, to be considered as the primary breadwinner, or the mother, who may be an OFW working in another country, as the main breadwinner. Or in double income households where you have both the wife and the husband working, women are considered as equal partners contributing to the income of the family. Now let's, in the next, if you can click next, Mabel, let me share the BDO context. For BDO, it is a very significant thing for us to have our chairperson as a woman. So Ms. Tessie C. Coson, who is part of the C family, is our chairperson. And in terms of representation, that carries a very big visual and mental inspiration for women to aspire to leadership positions when you have a woman as your chair. So it's something that you cannot really quantify or put into a metric, but to see a leader in a traditional industry and have that leader be a woman has a very positive impact in terms of inspiring women to aspire for leadership roles. Then there's also the BDO culture. which is based on merit and performance. Some of our senior leaders would like to describe that as agnostic approach to determining leaders or to hiring, but it really is very much based on merit and performance. And along with that is a strong focus on a safe, collaborative, very professional, and very customer-focused work environment. At the same time, the bank also provides long-term professional growth through training and development opportunities for the bankers, the employees to rise through the ranks. And the bank also practices internal hiring, looking for opportunities for employees within the different companies under the BDO conglomerate. So all of that in total really helps promote women in leadership and recognizes their role as equal partners in the bank's performance and success. Next slide, please. Just to add to that too, at the moment, according to a study by the International Labour Organization and Investing in Women, which is an Australian-sponsored program, only 37% of Filipino enterprises had a board chairperson who was female, and only 25% had a gender-balanced board. And as shown in that same study, when boardrooms are chaired by a woman, enterprises were 13% more likely to have improved business outcomes. So there you have it, the actual numbers. Now on this slide, I'd like to share more of the results of that ILO and IWS study. So here is the answer to the business case question. Why exactly do we need to have gender diversity? A lot of senior leaders in local companies ask this because they don't see why it's important, because they see women in senior roles, they see a lot of women in the office. Why do we need gender diversity at all? And these are very compelling results. So the first one there, so on the left, you would see the percentage, and the y-axis represents 5 factors. The first one is the ability to attract and retain talent. And here you would see that that's at close to 80%. And this represents the responses of 389 enterprises in the Philippines, 84% of whom agreed that gender diversity initiatives enhance their business outcomes. So it enhanced the ability to attract and retain talent. We still have a very, very much hot market for talent because generally of the young population of the Philippines compared to other Asian countries. The second factor there is greater creativity, innovation, and openness. And studies show that when you have a more diverse workforce, or even just a more diverse team, they are 6 times more productive and 6 times more likely to provide creative solutions to customers' problems through innovative ways, as compared to a team that is not as diverse or not as different from each other. The third factor there is increased business outcomes, including profitability and productivity. So again, a very high score at almost 70%. The fourth one is, of course, enhanced company reputation. And this is part of the risks that a company has to manage. In terms of competition, in terms of sustainability, a risk-based approach to the social impact of a company is what is now being proposed if you are pursuing a sustainable framework for your company. And finally, and perhaps often the most important part, is a better ability to gauge customer interest and demand. Because think about it, if you are in a company where all the leaders are men, but your customers are predominantly women, how can you best address the needs and the challenges of your female customers if you only have men making all the decisions, right? That really makes real business sense and very practical, commonsensical approach. Next, please. Mabel, yes. Okay, so yes, this is based on the business case for women in business and management in the Philippines, a joint research by the ILO and Investing in Women. Next slide, please. So again, bringing it to BDO, how does that reflect in the bank? So just some markers that we have. For example, we have a 4.74% turnover, which is very much below the average 6 to 7% turnover across industries in the Philippines. We have a 99% return to work rate, which refers to employees who take paternal leave, so both maternity and paternity leaves. 99% of them return to work and assume their former work. We have had a consistent progressive net income growth for the past year since 2015, 2016, pre-COVID, of course. And then BDO is the country's largest bank. We have the largest resources, customer loans, deposits, assets, capital, and branch network, with a total of 3.4 trillion pesos in resources. So pretty formidable. And not that I am directly correlating gender to this performance numbers, right? But it gives you an idea of how successful companies manage their workforce and how they leverage on the strengths and the contributions of their employees. And part of that is leveraging on the strengths and contributions of women in the workplace. Next slide, please. So having gone through all of that, another question that is very common, Nabel, if you can click on the next slide. What are the top challenges in gender diversity now? So if you click on next, let's look at what the women's challenges are. I only put in the top three most recent ones now. Number one is women are overrepresented in support groups, in temporary or part-time employment, and in the service sector as a whole. So while that really is the backbone or the foundation of any company, there has to be a program or a support system that will enable more women to assume higher responsibilities, greater roles within companies and organizations locally. Number two, particularly now during COVID, women really need flexible work arrangements and work from home to be able to perform their responsibility well. And yet, at the same time, the COVID situation, the pandemic situation, has also increased women's double burden, which was already in existence, but it was doubled even more during the pandemic. This burden on family and work responsibility. So balancing that, either taking care of the children and their education at home, or more recently, we see a lot more families taking care of elderly, usually their parents or their elderly relatives. Now, what about men? What are the challenges for men in terms of gender diversity? Number one, men struggle to act or react in support of women. And this is partly out of fear that they will be doing the wrong thing, partly out of concern also that women may be a threat to them in terms of their own rise in the organization, and generally not really as well versed in terms of the women's movement, why these are the challenges that women have and what role they have, how they can be allies, for example, for women. Men also have to overcome years of gender stereotypes and learned behavior. And in the Philippines, macho culture was mentioned before. That is still very much true. And even in professional settings, it has a tendency to rear its head every once in a while. But we have to work with boys earlier so that they do not learn the same behavior that their fathers and their grandfathers learned in terms of respecting women as equal partners and not looking at gender stereotypes from past generations. And the third one is men also need flexible work arrangements and work from home. As the ambassador also said, men also have aspirations of being closer to their children. They also want to have more options in terms of what they really want to pursue in life. But the behavior or the expectation for them to be the head of the family is very much ingrained in Filipino culture. And while women have, as I said earlier, have started to assume that responsibility in double income households, men still have that deeply ingrained expectation that I should be, to quote a saying, bring home the bacon, or I should be the one responsible for my family. And so it's difficult for them to process the changes in terms of how women perceive themselves in relation to how they should be perceiving themselves and reacting and changing their expectations of themselves as well. And next, please, at the bottom for both, Mabel. So given this, both men and women need to better understand really what gender diversity means and how it impacts business success. So I have had senior leaders across Asia sharing their concerns with me and saying, I know this is the right thing to do. I know the company supports this, but I don't really subscribe to feminism, or I don't really like these women who hate men. I'm so, they're very intimidating. And, education, information, and awareness is the most potent weapon against that kind of thinking or that kind of fear. And if I may share one very effective action that I've found is to ask senior leaders, do you have a daughter? Do you have a sister? What are your hopes and aspirations for her when she grows up, when she joins the workforce? Wouldn't you want her to have the same opportunities that you've had in your own rise, in your career, in your success? Wouldn't you want her to also have the opportunity, the same rights, be paid equal, equal to any other man who has the same skills or the same expertise, or brings the same expertise or perspective to work? And that is a very effective way of opening senior male leaders' eyes in terms of, yes, well, yeah, come to think of it, I want the best for my daughter, and I want to have a world in the future where my daughter can enjoy all these equal opportunities and equal rights and equal representation, for her to have a voice and be a decision maker. And then finally, the second there is gender diversity should translate not just to better customer service. So one speculation that people have about banks having a lot of female bank tellers is because females are more pleasing to look at. And I understand from the previous generation that before, the criteria for hiring bank tellers was that they should be like models. They should be very attractive to customers. They should be slim. They should be well dressed, And with the anti-discrimination policies that we have in place and laws, all of those are gone now. But it's not just really customer service. When you look at it, it's not just the physical aspect of it, but how women are able to better perform customer service face to face, and how those skills are very much important in establishing close relationships with your clients. That's one. But beyond that, beyond customer service, we also need to have a better understanding of the customer perspective and challenges. For example, financial inclusion is very important for BDO. And we have our BDO Network Bank that takes care of micro, small, and medium enterprises, that particular segment. And one of the things that they are nurturing, one of the target audiences that they are nurturing are women entrepreneurs. And looking at the barriers, how they can address barriers to women entrepreneurs. What are those barriers? Until a few years ago, women could not sign, could not enter into contracts without a husband's approval. Women cannot open a bank account without a husband's approval. So, you know, these are things that have to be removed. I'm not familiar with how other banks would practice it, but this is how we would look at women as a particular customer, where you need to address their challenges to be able to really perform financial inclusion and include them as entrepreneurs. So this leads to more effective solutions, which leads to customer loyalty and to positive business performance. Okay. And the next slide. So finally, another question, how do you then accomplish gender diversity? How does one start? Number one, click please, Mabel. You really have to go back to your core values. And again, Ambassador also shared this, that you have to look at your values as a country, as a company. What is important to you? How would diversity and inclusion and gender diversity in particular fit into the core values that you have as a company? And you always have to keep going back and back there if you lose your way. If you are faced with a situation where you have to make a decision, you always go back to what would our core values tell us. Number two, I'm a very big fan of data. Analyze your demographic data, because that's where you will start. If you don't know how many women you have in the organization or how many men, then you can't really make recommendations. You can't really analyze what the implications are for the business, and you can't find the gaps which you need to address. Number three, who and where are your stakeholders located and what is important to them? In sustainability, we call this materiality. What is material to your stakeholders? What keeps them up at night? How do you impact their environment, their social aspects, and how does your governance impact them? Number four, clearly articulate your gender diversity policy. So it starts with that. If it's not written in a policy or in a philosophy and not articulated, then it's just a fad. It's just something that you do out of following what you perceive are developments that would be good for employee engagement. It has to be in a policy. You allocate resources, meaning a budget. You allocate leadership support. And most important of all, you align it with business goals. And finally, number five, work with your employees to accomplish your gender diversity goals. A lot of successful companies have employee resource groups or employee business groups. And when these are organically driven by employees themselves who are passionate about driving women in leadership, for example, or LGBT pride, then that's the best engagement that you have in terms of driving gender diversity. And so in my last slide, I would like to close with this quote from former Justice Ginsburg. She said that women belong in all places where decisions are being made. And on that note, thank you, everyone. I hope you learned from my presentation, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mala. This was really very, very insightful, and I really thank you for the great work you do together with BDO to ensure gender diversity and inclusion. It's very, very important to have such a big and esteemed organizations as yours to help to set, you know, the goals for other organizations to follow somehow. Good, thank you. All right, let's go to the Q&A. And for the Q&A today, I'm very happy that we have all of our speakers available for this. So can I call on to join me here as spotlighted on Zoom, our ambassador designate Annika Thunberg, president of NordCham, Bo Lundqvist, and VP of Sustainability from BDO, Marla Garin Alvarez. Thank you for doing this Q&A with us as well. And I want to jump straight out into the deep water with a question for all of you. There's a question here. How would you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion with colleagues who don't understand its importance? Now that's, I think, is a pretty good question. Maybe we can have Ambassador Designate Annika Thunberg to share your perspective on this first, if that's okay.
Yep. Thank you very much, Jesper. And I wanted to thank Marla for a very interesting presentation. I learned a lot about the Philippines listening to you, and many of your insights are very, very important. And for example, as you will have much more to say about this question than I have, I believe, and you already answered part of it, talking about, how would you address senior leaders, CEOs, for example, in neighboring countries here who feel afraid of feminism or feel afraid of the women dominance. And then to go back to the personal, what you said was that the good questions to ask. What are your expectations, or what are your what do you want for your daughter? What do you want? So to bring it back to the personal, I think it is I would agree with Marla that this is a very good strategy. And then I think what has helped us, because of course, since we adopted the feminist foreign policy, we were the first country to do so in 2014. And this wasn't necessarily that popular in the foreign ministry at the time, because a lot of colleagues felt, oh my God, we have worked on gender equality forever. And why are we now adopting a feminist foreign policy? What does that mean? What does that add? But it's really interesting what we have seen in the foreign ministry, that all colleagues after just a couple of years were really on board and thought that this was great, because it gave us it took the debate to a different level. And then you can also discuss that, what do we mean? And we do get that question, of course, still. The concern that, well, feminism means that you want the society to be dominated by women, where of course we always have to, bring back the debate to what I said. We are, feminism is not at all about women dominating. It is about achieving parity. It is, if we look at that, as I said in the beginning, where that women are 50% of the population, the world's population, but also, 50% of any minority or nationality, or in every socioeconomic strata and so on. And then we look at the specifics and we see that, of course, women still don't have the rights, the representation or the resources in the same way that men have. So this is usually has been a good formula also at the political level to discuss the issues that, actually there are perhaps only 30% women working in being members of the leadership group of a company, for example. And what is it that don't you think that it is a good idea to have more diversity? The arguments on diversity and why it is important, why it is good for productivity, as also Marla said. And of course, in sectors where you have many, there's still a big challenge, as I mentioned, in education. Women do not necessarily still. You have more in the younger generation now studying science and and technology and engineering. But then of course we have the interesting examples that you actually have a lot of women who are microbiologists, and that is why the health companies have achieved such high level of parity. You have a lot of CEOs, you have a lot of middle managers in health, in big multinational health companies all over the world, and that is because you have a lot of women microbiologists. So why don't you have more women in laser physics, for example? So then, you know, and to work with children, as Marla also said, you know, boys, but also girls. And what some of the companies do, that they go out and really talk to young girls about mathematics, about science, about physics and chemistry and engineering and so on. So and then when you see the possibilities and at a personal level, you're not really afraid of the change. It just becomes natural. We are all human beings. We are all human individuals, and we are not. It's not a we against them, but it's really something we all do together based on individual preferences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika. Maybe a short perspective from Marla on how would you advocate for diversity and inclusion with colleagues who don't understand its importance. I know you basically reply, you have your reply from your presentation, but still.
Yeah. So I would always say that you have to do a lot of groundwork and research, both from a professional and personal perspective. You can always professionally ground it in terms of issues of competitiveness within the industry and how you would fare against others who are seen as diverse and inclusive. You can also ground it on engagement and retention. If you are losing women in the organization, why is that? And what are the others doing? So you have to benchmark, groundwork, and really prepare a strong business case for senior leadership. But the other part of it is personal as well, and that includes telling stories, getting them to listen to personal accounts of employees of what their struggles are, how diversity and inclusion, most importantly, is something that can help them perform better, because they can come to work as themselves and they do not have to hide, they do not have to be stressed about their situation at home, because they would know that they have a company that is willing to reasonably accommodate the needs that they have because of their unique situations.
Thank you for sharing, Marla. And Bo, would you have a short comment to this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But perhaps first I'd like to thank Annika and Marla for their presentations as well. Stunning and very good. You know, two perspectives from basically two opposite parts of the world, but still very much aligned. And I can see, I also see from the comments that our audience today see great value in what was presented today. So thank you very much. To answer the question, of course I agree with everything that has been put forward by Annika and Marla. I wanted to perhaps put up my own perspective in as a businessman to it. I do believe that policies are important. It should be part of any company's set of policies. There should be what Marla has been talked about, the continuous educational effort as part of the HR strategy. But I think in addition to that, I think you just need to, as a leader, as a business leader, you gotta have to dare to actually include women in higher management. I think you need to practice what you preach. It cannot just be a policy. You have to actively promote women and make sure that women gets the opportunity for a promotion in all levels of management. I think that there is no training or policy that can actually make gender equality happen unless you let women show men that they can do most probably a better job in the same position. So that is what I have always done since the start in the company that I work in. And that has worked very well. We do not need to refer to any policies. I don't think that we necessarily need to educate everyone, because it is a commonly known fact here that it doesn't really matter what gender you are. You still have an equal opportunity as long as you're willing to do a good job.
Thank you, Bo, for sharing your perspectives as well. It's good with this diverse board as well, and I agree. We are getting a lot of fantastic perspectives for our audience to be inspired by. Another question here that I think is very relevant during these times is looking at not so much gender diversity, but diversity as such in, work from home is very much, something we do in the Philippines these days. And a diverse work from home setting is certainly there, right? We have people with different opportunities, different settings for work from home. How, just brief comment on that. How do you and your company deal with that? How do you ensure that everybody have the same opportunities? Because obviously, if you are in a big household with many relatives, and that might disturb you, that might mean that you are not able to work the same way as those that are in a different setting. Maybe Marla, can you share very briefly on how is BDO? Are you doing anything special in that way? I mean, you already mentioned this thing about women taking on double work, basically.
Yes. So first of all, BDO has a very robust COVID-19 response, which started even way before the pandemic was officially proclaimed. The minute there were these reports from Wuhan, the company already started activating its BCP. So having said that, in terms of work from home, currently less than 25% of the population are able to work from home. And that is because of the nature of the functions that we all have. So, for example, in terms of the branches, they really cannot work from home because they have to be present at the branches to attend to customers face to face. But we do have policies in terms of work hours that what you call this reduced work hours for our branch employees, and allowances to help them. And for those who are able to do work from home, they are given the option to also report for work if they do not have the capability or the physical setup to be able to work from home or connect from home. So apart from the physical setup, there's also the matter of internet connectivity, which is not always ideal in many different locations in the country. But we ensure that managers are able to work and discuss this thoroughly with employees to know what would work for them. So there are options available, and we do work with individual cases, individual teams. It's different for each one. It's different for the functions, based on the functions that the groups have.
Okay, thank you. So my understanding is that you have a policy for it. Basically, you deal with it, and you look into how can you help? How can you help to make everybody still being able to succeed in that job?
Yes.
That's great. I think we are also 1.5 years into the pandemic, but still, I think a number of companies are still not really, enough aware of these challenges faced. Maybe. Bo, would you have anything to share on this matter as well?
Yeah, so as a company, we did have a policy around work from home before the pandemic struck, but it was of course more of a case-to-case basis when people needed to work from home. Could be for family purposes or reasons, etc. Now that all changed with the pandemic, where at least in our business, we have to, within a couple of days, change our business model to actually work from home. So we have to reformulate our policies to now ensure that that we would be supportive of that business model and that we could empower our employees to continue working in the very same way they did, but now with online tools. So that comes with policy. It also comes with proper equipment. So most people are not equipped, perhaps, to work efficiently from home prior to the pandemic. So there is an IT part of this, and I think there's also a bit of training and experience, because it is not the same thing for men or women to deliver productive work from a home environment. So there's a number of things that needs to be changed in the environment. There's a number of maybe changes and adoption that needs to be made in the home environment, family members, etc. And we've gone through that. I don't think that we are perfect yet, but we're a lot better now and a lot more. I think actually we did an internal study on that topic. We're actually more efficient during pandemic than we were before. And a lot of that is because of the work from home has now improved. So from that perspective,
yes,
good.
Agree, it's not for everyone. Yeah, agree with you.
Thank you, Bo, as well, for sharing. And Annika, would you have a brief comment on this? I know you just arrived in the Philippines, and I mean, maybe not that much Philippine-related perspectives to share yet, but do you have any? Would you have some thoughts on it?
Yes, I can just give a comment that is more general, and which of course what we have seen during the pandemic is that that women then, as Marla also said, get a more of a double burden. The double burden has increased, and well, we haven't really had that situation then in Sweden, and but I saw it in Mexico, of course, which is it's a more well, gender issues are still very much present. I mean, we didn't see it in Sweden because, first of all, as I mentioned, we had the schools open, so when parents worked at home, there wasn't that big of a difference with well, from before the pandemic, since the children were in school. So homeschooling has not been any issue for us. And of course, with parents, both parents working at home, I mean, we see the advantage again that we have much more equal households at this point. So it has not become a double burden for women. It's become a different burden for both parents. But with the situation when children are actually in school and parents do work from home, they still share the burden in the home. And I think that listening to what Marla said as well and learning about issues, I mean, it's here is perhaps something to continue working on. I mean, the notion that women to a large extent continue to be the person in the couple who is responsible for the house and the family and the children. And of course, this kind of situation that we have now, that really it really pinpoints this very important issue for working on a better burden sharing in the house. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika, for sharing as well. It's 2:30. We are officially supposed to finish actually, but I hope, I mean, I'm sorry I didn't ask you earlier, but maybe we can do 10-15 minutes more. There's a lot of very interesting questions and a lot of perspectives to be shared, and I think a lot of, you provide so inspiring replies. So I hope so. I saw a thumb up, and so let's go on. I really appreciate this, and I'm sure our audience also appreciate that there's more time to ask their questions. Let's go straight into it. A little bit more controversial, especially here in the Philippines. We talked about the stereotype of men being the clan leader a little bit, but also the policies here in the Philippines on maternity versus paternity leave. I believe that women have 105 days and men has 7 plus 7 if they really push it, right? How do you see that? And I mean, that is quite different from, for instance, the Nordic countries where men has much more paternity leave and options for that. How do you see that in terms of, is there a need for a change of that policy? How to deal with this? Can it just be done internally in the companies? Maybe Marla first.
You know, Jesper, that's one of my dreams actually, to have an actual real parental leave in place in the Philippines. And what that means is to have equal opportunities in terms of the number of days, so that we can address that double burden. One factor is fathers should have equal opportunity to bond with their children and spend more time with their children when they're newborns. And it's not an activity that should be seen as babysitting, but really taking care of your own child. And so if we have a parental leave that enables both parents to avail of the same amount of days to spend with the family, then I think that would very much help in terms of addressing that burden of childcare, for one. That another type of leave can also be developed, going into the leaves, right? In terms of elderly care, that's also something that I hope can be a leave that would be in place in the Philippines. Elderly care, so that you can take time off to take care of your parents. That's an increasingly common burden that we have now in the country, but it's not acknowledged and it's really not part of the benefits that is offered by companies, unless you're a single individual and really all, or even if you're married, what you can just do is file for regular vacation leave, not an elderly care leave. So there. And maybe Ambassador Anika can, you know, help in the storytelling, because it helps if companies in the Philippines are aware of what the actual practice is, what the benefits are, showing proof points, so that they can imagine what it's like to be in that kind of situation, and how that can help the business in terms of providing both benefits to parents.
That's a great
Shall I?
suggestion.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Shall I go ahead? The question was a question directed to me. Is that okay, Jesper?
Yes, please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yes, I think that what we can show is, as I mentioned in my speech, we have had, since we have had equal parental leave for men and women since the 1970s. Then of course it took quite a bit of time before also men started to use it. So I mean, a policy can, I mean, a decision can be taken by government, and then it takes 20 more years before it starts to be implemented. And then you also see what can you do to promote that. But I think, as I mentioned, I have seen the changes in my generation, and that the majority of men, I think it is still a class issue, actually, also in the Nordic countries, where we, of course, the socioeconomic differences are not as great as in many other parts of the world, but of course we still have socioeconomic differences. I would say that it's very common in the middle class, and to take time off, and also in the educated middle class. And of course, if you work in the public sector, we can see that in the government offices, and my colleagues, they do that. but you may have more conservative practices both in the upper class and also in the working class in places. But of course, I shouldn't generalize because we have exceptions everywhere. And of course, as I mentioned, the private sector is still a challenge. Although you do have the law, you do have the reforms, and I think that what we have achieved in the public sector is because you have had really strong leadership from the government. You have had ministers, you have state secretaries, you have a clear policy. And that is also why the policy has started to change in the state-owned or partially state-owned companies, because of course they also more follow the guidelines from the government. So then it becomes, if you have that kind of policy, the leadership adopts it, they show that you can do it, they promote both parental leave in general, maternity leave and paternity leave. As I mentioned with the Volvo cars that actually then got a prize for this because they did promote paternity leave in particular, then you do get a change. So we need reforms and policies, but then we need leadership at the highest level to show that this is how you can do things, and this actually is good for the company. I think that, I mean, since the Nordic countries, we are successful countries socioeconomically. Economically, we're very successful, and we lead most of the indexes all over the world in any category almost. And this is although we were quite 100 years ago, we were the poorest countries of Europe. We were in the poor corner of Europe. So we have seen these developments over only the last century. But I mean, so what we can see is that that it's not so that equal treatment and that men take paternity leave, that in any way affects the productivity of our companies. The opposite, we are very successful. So I think that, again, to show the good business case for this. And I think one factor that is important is for all of us, both men and women, is that we are not we are part of a machinery. I mean, in my position, for example, yes, I have the position I have. Of course, I take the responsibility for that. But if I'm on vacation, I have a deputy who can do the job. I don't think we ever should think that we are the only ones who can do the job, and that is also goes with parental leave. You know, if a person leaves for a while to go on parental leave, someone else can do the job equally well. And I think that this mentality, which I believe is quite Nordic as well, it does contribute to greater efficiency and productivity, because we do not put all the responsibility on the person, but it is on the system, it is on the institutions, it is on the work we do together, and to share information is very important. What is most important is that I share the information I have with the person who will replace me for a while, and then that person can do an equally good job as I do. So I think that mentality also helps with the parental leave issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika, for sharing your perspectives on this and getting us inspired from Swedish examples. Bo, would you have a brief remark on maternity versus paternity?
Yeah, I think, and I'll let me address the question from the perspective of a Swede. And I grew up, Annika, in what you mentioned earlier, in one of those households where my dad spent, I think, in as much time as my mother raising me. So one of those 70s early adopters of that law. So that was the way I was raised. And when I had my first child here in the Philippines, which was a while back, I was just shocked to find out that I couldn't be in the room where my child was born unless I had to attend special training, which I did for weeks because I just thought that that's kind of the start of parenthood, right? To be part and parcel of, you know, when the child is born. And in those days, and this is now 15 years ago or something like that, that was an outlier in the Philippines, which surprised me a lot. And I think it starts kind of from there, because the assumption was that the father, in this case me, I had absolutely nothing to do with this. You know, that was that, right? And I think insisting on that was a very good decision on my part. So I think that and while I think that it's better now in the Philippines, I think that it's easier to be part of this. What Marla was talking about, the macho culture, I think is still unfortunately very much present with, you know, women stay home and take care of the babies and all of that, and that then is reflected in the law that Jesper was talking about. As an employer here, that is really all I have to give to an employee that becomes father, 7 days, which we all know is nothing, right, in terms of taking care of a newborn child. There is two things that needs to change. One is the attitude. We need to remove the macho that, again, we also had in Sweden a long time ago. We need to make it socially, I think, okay for a dad to take care of babies, to change diapers and mix the milk and all the other fun stuff that goes with it. It has to be socially acceptable. And then the next is, I think the laws and regulations needs to help employers to actually allow dads to be home with their babies, so that they financially can support that very important activity in, you know, when they have decided to become a parent. Because I think while in the Philippines there is a lot more women that are now working, meaning you have a situation with 2 working parents, which is a great evolution. I think that it's also a fact, and I don't have any mathematics or studies to back this up, but I would be fairly sure of the fact that still the majority of families have a man that is the breadwinner, and that means that removing that economy from an average household is, of course, it's a difficult decision to take unless you get enough support from your employer and the company. So there's a lot of things that needs to be, I think, addressed. It's not just a matter of gender equality. There is a lot of, you know, social norms, as well as laws and regulations, company policies. It all has to kind of fall in place for this to eventually change to the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. Almost up the 15 minutes I asked for. Time goes very fast. There's so many things to be shared on this, and there's still so many questions to be asked. I'm taking the liberty to ask 2 more questions, and one of them will be a rounding up question. So I hope that's okay. I hope you don't have anything planned straight away. Otherwise, I'm really sorry about it. So one thing, we have a great question here from one of our participants, actually from Volvo Cars. So Chris Yu, who is heading Volvo Philippines, he is asking that, you know, they continue to advocate for equality in leadership in business, and in the Philippines, 1/3 of the board members are women. But he's asking still, what is your advice for companies who are pushing this advocacy in traditionally male-dominated industries like the automotive industry? And what kind of message can you share with men in leadership who are in support of diversity? Very, very brief, because we are totally overrunning time. Maybe Bo, if you can you have anything first, because you come from IT, and that has, at least in the past, been very much dominated by male.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Chris, and it's very nice to see you again, of course. We go back a long time, and thank you, Volvo, for supporting NordCham since almost the first day. And thank you for the question. I'll go back to pretty much what I said from start. I think, and yes, I come from an industry that is very much male dominated, although that is also getting a lot better. But I think the only, we can talk about this until the cows comes home. you gotta have you gotta go out and actually nominate women to leadership positions, and you gotta put women in, or it could also be LGBTQ participants for that matter. Let them show that it really doesn't matter what gender you belong to in any position of a company. It's just a matter of expertise and willingness to work. As long as other fellow managers, employees, direct reports, etc., will see that, and will see that again in the eyes of the leadership board, etc., gender has no real bearing, it will eventually change by itself. And as I said, this is exactly what we've done in my company, and it's been a very successful strategy. Just go out and do it.
Thank you, Bo. And a brief comment from Annika.
Yeah. Yes, I think that you have in the past you had male-dominated sectors everywhere. I mean, when I started working at the Department of Political Science at the University of Lund, that was in 1987. We actually didn't have a single. There was no professor. There was no women. No woman had done a PhD in that department. We're talking about the 1987 in political science. Today, political science is dominated by women. But why was that? Well, it was because the male leadership of that department in the past had not thought that women could do the job. They did not believe that women could study political science and write a PhD in that area. And what did the new leadership do? Well, they did what Bo was saying. You know, they actively started to recruit women. They actively started to recruit women, and I was one of them. Then they recruited senior women, but they recruited junior women that I was at the time, and many of us to make a difference. Then of course that takes time. Similar to I mean, we need more girls to study engineering, technology, science. So go out to the schools, talk to girls, scholarships. I mean, what many Swedish companies do now to change the situation in the future, then it will not be an issue anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. And Marla?
I would go back to research because, you know, if you look at statistics, half or more than half of customers or buyers of automotives in the Philippines are women. So you are ignoring that significant number of your customers if you continue to have a male-dominated leadership and not take into consideration your female customers in decision-making. For men in leadership who want to support diversity, you can be allies to women. There are ways to support women in leadership as mentors, as coaches, as advocates of gender equality, so that other men will see that you are setting an example and you are a role model for others to follow.
Thank you. I like your data-driven approach and the arguments from that. Nobody can argue against it. Really well. All right, let's round this up, and I'm going to do that with a question from the audience and just add a little bit to it. So Eric is saying, with all the well-educated women in the Philippines, it's not that hard to achieve gender parity in the workplace. Also, in his company, they employ more women than men, and in the management team, they outnumber the men 2 to 1. In the boardroom, they are also getting there as well. But what more should they strive for? What comes next? Is it, especially here in the Philippines, I think, age and experience? Is it something to look for in terms of diversity? Is it physical and mental disabilities, or what would you say? Now, I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but I personally think that those two areas are something very critical to look at here in the Philippines as well. Maybe I can ask. This is a bit hard question though, but can I ask Bo for your quick comment to this first?
Yeah, again, personal answer. I think age is another barrier that we need to break down here. I don't think that if we talk about senior positions, experience is great, but it doesn't have to be, and to a certain extent that would be required. But age is not. So I think age is something that we should be addressing. Personally, I talked about the LGBTQ community. I think that is another group in the society that may face challenges, especially in terms of promotion to managerial positions. So that's something I think to look at. Last, I know that in Sweden particularly, there is a lot of support being given to companies that employ people with handicap, and there is, because there are additional investments that you need to do to produce, and depend on, of course, what industry, but to help somebody with a handicap to do a meaningful job. I don't see that kind of support here, and then personally, I'd be very passionate about that would be a way where that type of, or those members of society could also be given an equal opportunity to get into producing meaningful work with the assistance that they would need in various ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. And maybe we go to Annika next. I know it's hard for you to comment on being new in the Philippines, but still, what comes next in general?
I can instead give an example from Mexico, where I served for 5 years, and I mean, also from the business sector. I believe when Swedish companies enter the market that have a very strong diversity focus, and I agree with the wide range of diversity. I mean, IKEA made a difference in Mexico when they opened, because they very clearly recruited in their recruitment policy. They recruited a very diverse group of people, and from all the different groups also that Bo mentioned, and that made a difference in the community and in society as a whole, because they had such clout. So I believe that setting this kind of example, if a company is a multinational company, they have a policy at the global level, and they can move in with that kind of perspective, it can make a huge difference in a bottom-up approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Designate Annika. And Marla, what would you say? What's the next step for a company that achieve gender diversity, basically?
So we have to go back to how we define gender diversity and gender equality. Remember that it's providing equal opportunities to both boys and girls and men and women. And in our case, for example, we have the majority female, but that is not gender parity, because you don't have equal representation of male and female. And so therefore, the next step that I see, if you do have that majority, is to look at, again, where are the areas or teams in your organization where men are underrepresented? And for example, is that in IT? Is that in is that in the branches? Or women? Where are women underrepresented? Is that in IT or in facilities, for example? And look at gender parity in a more granular perspective, so that you are also able to hire, perform diverse hiring, where you can allow the other gender to have an equal opportunity to be part of those teams, and you are able to balance. Because gender diversity and equality is not having an all women organization. It's not hiring where you have candidates who are all women or all men. It should be having another gender present always in terms of your candidate slate, so that all skills being equal, they are faced with the same job description, then you can decide on who the best candidate is, or who best fits the role that you have in mind, and what does the team in particular need. If they're all men, definitely you should hire a woman, so that you can have that female perspective, and vice versa. So that's another way of looking at gender parity, that we may sometimes not perceive in the Philippines, just because we feel we already have a lot of women represented in the organization.
Thank you so much. I think that was a great final answer to the last question. Very, very nice. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your perspectives and your insights with all of us here today. And as agreed previously, we will also share this recording so we can reach even more people and share the good messages and the inspiration. Now, before we finish, before I give a very short closing remark, I would like us to take a group picture, just us here on the panel. I believe Ma'an is ready to help to take the picture, but let me count on. Ma'an, you can count down, it's probably better.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Got it. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you so much again to our speakers today. Ambassador Designate Annika Thunberg, VP of Sustainability, Head of Sustainability Marla Garin Alvarez from BDO, from our premium partner here at NordCham. We really appreciate your support and help all the time. And of course also to our very own President Bo Lundqvist. Thanks to all of you. I just want to finish up with a short comment, and this is from Sundar Pichai, who is he's the CEO of Alphabet. They are the ones owning Google, just in case you wonder who Alphabet is. And he is saying a diverse mix of voices leads to better discussions, decisions, and outcomes for everyone. And I think that is a great way of finalizing this and summing up what we've been talking about. It is really about getting diversity into your team, into everything. With that, I want to conclude this event. Again, thank you so much for everybody. Thank you for our participants for staying with us for an additional half hour. I really think this was great, very much inspiring. Thank you to the Swedish Embassy. Thank you to BDO for being part of this. Have a good day, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.